So good morning, my name is Jacqueline Twilley, career negotiation and expert, best-selling author of Navigating the Career Jungle, a guide for young professional. So why do we work? We work so that we can earn money for things like food, cars, vacations, and we work to earn money, right? So let me give you a little bit about my background before I jump into the presentation. I work to eliminate the gender wage gap. That is my life's mission. So what we're going to cover is some of the reasons why there is a gender wage gap, and then we're going to get into some strategies to solve that. One thing that we can do, while there's a lot of things we can't control, we can ask. So our purpose today is to make sure we don't leave any money on the table. So whether it's a new salary that you're negotiating for a new position, or if you're going into a performance review talk, we're going to go beyond salary and deep dive into some things that you can get to advance your career and things that are going to set you up to be successful. So it's indisputable that there's a wage gap. We know that. When you talk about how much, then people kind of get into semantics of a 0.5% or a half cent. And since 1964, the wage gap really has not expanded much at all. So right now, women across the board earn less than men. So when it comes to equal pay days, what you'll normally see is there's a big equal pay day around April. And that's the day that marks the day in the year that women have to work to earn what their non-Hispanic white male counterparts earned that previous year. Well, just last week we had Native American Equal Pay Day, and it was really disappointing that Native women have to work all the way, pretty much a full year, just to earn what their male counterparts earned the last year. So why is there a gender wage gap? There's a couple of reasons. One is there's an education gap. Although more women are becoming educated and graduating from college at higher rates than their males, there's access to childcare and also elder care. Women are primary caretakers of both young kids and older parents. Some of it is just basic discrimination, and then access to paid leave when they're giving birth or things like that. Some of it is also work schedule. So when we look at the wage gap, most people think, oh, it's just because women go into low-wage jobs like education, which education is a low-paying job, but that's not the only reason why. Because when we look at lawyers and we look at pharmacists, there's still a wage gap, but with pharmacists, it's much smaller, and that's in part due to work schedules. So this is what this session is all about, negotiating. Another part of that wage gap is that women just don't ask. So when they get an offer, they get so excited for a position that they just take it. So let me tell you what happened to me. A few years ago, well, more than a few years ago, I was a graduate student getting my MBA, and I was working a full-time job. And it was kind of stressful, so I was transitioning. At the end of this interview process, I get the phone call from the employer. I recognize the number. I was sitting in my Jeep Liberty in front of the leasing office at my apartment complex. So it rings, we exchange pleasantries, and he says, Jacqueline, we're really impressed with you. We want to offer you the job. Immediately, I paused. That's a negotiation tactic, but I wasn't doing that to negotiate. Internally, I was screaming, oh my God, thank you for picking me and giving me a job, which is how a lot of people feel. So, fast forward. He says, are you there? And I said, yeah, I'll take it. Boom. Just like that, I had given away all of my negotiating power. I had nothing left. It was all gone. So a few months into the job, I'm making friends at work, and I realized my buddy who sits on the other cubicle, who does my same job, we have similar types of experience, he's getting paid more than me. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should be angry. I didn't know if I should be upset. I was just confused. And so ultimately I realized I had to take responsibility, because a lot of that was just me not asking. Now, no one said, hey, do you want to negotiate? It's expected that you negotiate, but I wasn't prepared. So I want to give you the tools that you can use so that you can negotiate. So this is one of my favorite quotes, and it says, if a woman does the same job as a man, she should get paid the same amount. And when we think about negotiation, no one tells you when you get a job offer you're supposed to negotiate, but sometimes when we think of the word negotiation, we think of boxing gloves. We get ready to fight. It's not a battle. It's just a conversation. So when that conversation is naturally progressing, you can pause and say, is this the best offer? Or you can just pause, as I did, but actually do it strategically. And after a 3 or 4 second pause, you can pipe back in and say, you know, I was really expecting the market rate, and we're going to talk about market rate in just a second, and this is a little bit below that. What can we do about that? So you want to use inclusive terms because research shows that when women negotiate, we have to fall into some of the stereotypes. Part of that is being communal. So when you're negotiating and you use things like we and our team, it works to your advantage, all right? So when we talk about this gender wage gap, it's also important to know that there's something called a market rate. A market rate is what someone gets paid with your skill set in your geographic area with your experience. So what a graphic designer or a senior copywriter earns in DC is going to be different from what a graphic designer earns in Tampa, Florida, or even Dallas, Texas. Why is that? Well, there's a couple of things that go into a market rate, but where do you find this magic number? There's a couple of websites that I would suggest that you use to find your market rate. One of them is salary.com, another is PayScale, and LinkedIn salaries. Now, there are hundreds of these websites, well, not hundreds, but dozens of websites out there with salary data. Most of this data is self-reported, so you don't want to rely solely on what you find in a Google search. You want to take it a step further. So you use the market rate that you find online as your base starting point, and then you're going to deep dive. What you do next is you talk to people in your network. So call someone who's in a professional association or someone that has experience in that industry and say, hey, I'm testing my skills in the market. I'm a senior copywriter. You know, I have about 2 years of experience. Does $70,000 sound about right for someone with my skill level? So what they're going to tell you is, yeah, that sounds about right, or that's a little bit low, or that's kind of high for your experience level. Somebody is going to benchmark that for you. What you don't want to do is go up to someone and say, hey, how much money do you make? Immediately, people are going to shut down. So just keep in mind that when you frame this question and you're fact-checking what that market rate is, you want to go back to, does this number sound about right from my experience? So first you're getting that number from a salary website, and then you're talking to someone in your industry. Be honest with yourself if you're missing some skills. But for women, what we tend to do is we tend to see that we have 6 of the 10 skills on the job description. So we're going to say, well, maybe I should earn a little bit less. Whereas males tend to look at that job description and have like 4 of the 10, be like, I could kill this job, and they need to pay me 15 grand more. Well, you just don't want to pull that 15 grand high and pie out of the sky. You want to base it on market facts. So a lot of people, when it comes to pay, a lot of companies are moving towards transparency. So in some instances, you can ask, hey, what is the range, the salary range for this job? When you're looking at the range, you don't want to benchmark yourself at the end. You want to be at the higher end of the range so that you can come back. Now, let me give you an example. I recently worked with someone, and they were presented a job offer for $60,000. The market rate and the data that we researched said that that was about $12,000 under what the market rate was. And because this was a public position, the salaries were published for the public to review, okay? So she had a very good idea of what the salary was. So she countered. But what she countered with was 20 grand more. That was way over what her qualifications were, way over what the market rate was. So what happened was they rescinded the offer. So you want to be realistic. When you look at that range, say, hey, I've done my research and I know that the market rate for this position with my experience level is this, and the offer you presented me was about $10,000 or $8,000 less. What can we do about that? And then once you present that question, don't rush in and be like, and that's when you pause. You stop and you wait for them to respond, because sometimes they need to go back and get approval from different people, okay? So that's a good place to park it for a second and just count internally. 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't rush to fill that awkward gap. And there will be awkward gaps from time to time when you're negotiating. So there's a framework that I use. It's prepare and package, practice, ask, and then decide if you will accept it or walk away. The reason why you want to use this framework, no matter which industry you're in, no matter what your skill level is, the better prepared you are, the higher your chances of getting what you want out of the negotiation. And in terms of your career, you're building a long-term relationship. This isn't just buying a car where you're going to see this car dealer maybe once, or you'll buy your second car from them. You're going to see this person daily, 40 plus hours a week. So make sure that you do preparation just as you would for a job interview. So when you get ready to go in and apply for the job, that application screen, there's this box and it says salary requirements are salary history. Some states are making that illegal to ask that question, what's your current salary or your previous salary? And the reason why they're making that illegal is because we know that women get paid less than men across the board, all around the country. So if you're basing a person's new salary on their previous salary, and you know that the system, whether conscious or unconscious, skewed against them, then you're just keeping them back there. So by eliminating that requirement in some states, and Georgia isn't one of those states that has eliminated that yet, but when you eliminate that requirement, what you're doing is you're just kind of leveling out the playing field, which makes it even more important for you to do your research on what the market rate is, okay? So another thing you want to look at, when you're putting in that number on the box, really be honest with yourself and look at that job description as if you were looking at a fill-in-the-blank test. How many of you have started a job, you started working, and then you realize, oh, this isn't the job I signed up for, right? A lot of us have experienced that there is a lot more to that job than what was on the description. And most people get into this mode where I should be paid more, right? You don't want to be in that position. It's part of your work going through the interview process is to fill in the blank of that job description. So let me give you an example. If you see on the job description that it says special assignments twice a year, well, don't just roll through that. Ask, what are the special assignments? And how long do they last? And who are the partners? Are they internal or external? Because when you're asking those questions, what you may find out is that the title doesn't actually match the overall work that you're going to be doing. And if your special assignments last 6 months, each special assignment, and there's 2 of them, guess what? That's pretty much your job. So just kind of deep dive. Some of those things that are on the job description, there are clues to help you negotiate, maybe a different title, or maybe even resources that you need. So when you're thinking about your career and what you're preparing to ask for, it's not just money. For example, let's say you're talking about those special assignments and you say, what did the person in this previous role do with the special assignments? And if someone says, oh, they kind of struggled with this, ask, well, why did they struggle with that? Oh, we didn't have the right technology, or we didn't have enough staff. So once you get the offer and you have that job, you can turn around and say, well, in order for me to be successful in this role, I'll need a certain software or equipment and the proper staff. So again, you're setting yourself up for success. It's not just about that salary number. At this point, you're looking at the bigger picture. What's going to help you exceed the expectations that you have set for the role? And if you know that there are certain missing elements that's going to help you be successful, the best time to ask for those resources is at the time that you accept that position. So when you package it together, a lot of people tend to think that they can go issue by issue. Today I'm going to ask for this, and I'll wait until they say yes or no, and then tomorrow I'm going to ask for this. What ends up happening is a lot of times, if you get the first thing and then you go back and you ask for something else, they're going to say, well, this person is being greedy. They're taking advantage of me. But if they say no and you keep asking, then you come off as kind of pesky or annoying. So present everything at once, and then you can talk about things as to how they relate to the position overall. When you're preparing your ask for a negotiation, put yourself in the other person's shoes. One of the questions that you should ask yourself is, how can I turn this situation and benefit the employer? Okay? So you might want a corner office because it's cool and you want the privacy and you can focus better. But if you just go up to that person and say, hey, I want a corner office, what can we do about that? They're going to say, nothing, your cubicle's just fine. However, if you're prepared for that conversation and you say, hey, a lot of times I'm dealing with sensitive data and I have to be booking a conference room so that I'm not having this conversation in the open because we have to protect our client's privacy. So in order for me to stop tying up a group resource in a conference room, it might be a better use of our resources if I move to an office with a closed door so that I can manage these confidential conversations. So when you look at both of those conversations, do you end up getting what you want, which is the office with the door? But the employer looks at it and saying, okay, this person gets an office with the door, but they're also protecting our client's privacy. They're protecting the information that we're getting, and they're not sharing it in the open, and they're not booking a conference room that holds 10 people, right, where we could be having meetings, and they can just be in there by themselves. So just think about those things and think through all the way through, how is your employer going to look at this on the other side? So that's part of your prepare and package. Practice. So we sound like one thing in our head, but when we actually say it out loud, we might sound a little differently. So when you're going in to negotiate, I tell people, write an outline of what you want to say. In the heat of the moment, conversations naturally drift, okay? They're going to go to this and that. You're going to start off on point A, and you're going to end up on point Z before you realize it. So part of you practicing is bringing that conversation back to the points at hand or to the issues that you want to discuss, those resources that you need to be successful in that position. So one of the things that I personally use in negotiation, when I'm in a face-to-face negotiation and things are going way out of whack, they're not going as planned, I'm getting a little off my game, I take a water bottle with me all the time. So I'll take a sip of water. If it's really out of control, I'm going to excuse myself for a restroom break. And feel free to use my tip because it allows you to take a step out. You're going to be walking a little bit. You can get your mind together. You can come back in and you can bring the conversation back to where you want it to go. Now, if you're negotiating over the phone, that's a little bit differently because you can't leave the phone for 5 minutes and people are just sitting there. But what you can do is say, if it's getting out of control, hey, let's revisit this conversation. Can we talk again tomorrow? Okay? Now, a lot of times when people are negotiating with a recruiter or someone who isn't the hiring manager, they tend to sometimes get strong-armed. And this is the part where it gets a little tricky. It's at the beginning of the interview process, this is the screening before you get to the hiring manager. They're going to say, tell me what you make now, or tell me what your salary expectations are. And what you want to do is you want to find out more about that position so that the salary that you're throwing out or the things that you're requesting are actually appropriate for the work that you're going to be doing. So what I would suggest you say is, okay, I love to talk about salary requirements, but can you tell me more about this position? Can you tell me more about the job duties? Sometimes they'll say, well, I can't tell you that until you give me a salary. In some cases, they're being truthful. In some cases, they just want to get you at the right price point, okay? If you have the skills and the qualifications and you're confident in what you can deliver, push a little back and say, you know what? I'm really excited about this position. Based on what I read, I'm excited to move forward. Can you share that salary range with me? Or you can say, can you come back to me with a little bit more information about the job description, and then I'll be able to give you the appropriate salary expectations. So you're moving that conversation from what you're earning now to what your expectations will be for the work that you're doing. You don't want to get pigeonholed into your previous salary because that might be a completely different set of duties than what you'll be doing going forward, as well as different set of expectations in terms of your deliverables. So focus that conversation on your salary expectations based on the work that you will be doing, not what you have done in the past. Now, this is a caveat. You do want to talk about your previous success. Talk about the milestones you've hit or exceeded, and use that as your leverage to ask for the higher end of the range. But before you give that number, you really want to understand what work you'll be doing. Now, once you practice, then you get into the ask. This is where a lot of people get nervous, and this is where it gets confusing. When do I ask? What do I say? How do I start the conversation? Well, you're going to be presented with an offer, either verbally or in writing. So once you receive that offer, respond naturally. If you're excited, pause. Don't just rush into, oh, yes. Don't make the mistake I made and just say, yeah, I'll take the job without negotiating at all. Even if it is exactly what you want, at least take one night to think it over and say, hey, when can I get back to you? But before that, when you're asking for what you want, hear what they have to say, ask them when you can get back to them, and go back and do a little bit more research. You want to make sure that the range and the resources that you're asking for are appropriate. You don't want to ask for 20 grand more if that's not the market rate. So don't just pull that number out of the thin blue air. Once you get the offer, and it's a firm offer, go back and figure out what the salary range is based on everything that you've discussed in the interview process, okay? Also, pay attention to those clues. If you have special projects twice a year, what resources do you need to exceed expectations? You want to set yourself up to win. You don't want to just get by. You know, and sometimes you have to get by on a shoestring budget, but again, the best time for you to ask for things to help you be successful in that role is at the time you accept the position. So just think very strategically about this. This is a time where I tell people, this is when you call your mentors and you have a quick conversation with them, and you run the offer over with them, okay? So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to decide if you want to accept it or walk away. This is huge because not every offer is a great offer. So when you're evaluating this, one of the common mistakes that people make is they don't read through the entire offer letter. They've heard one thing over the phone, they just assume that the offer letter matches that. There's something called clerical errors. People who send offer letters, sometimes they copy and paste, believe it or not. They're not typing from scratch. So they could have had something on that letter from the previous person, whether it's a lower salary or different resources or different vacation times, tuition reimbursement, or any type of perks that you've negotiated for, it might not be in that letter. So you want to comb through it very thoroughly and have someone else look it over for you. The reason why is you might be excited. You might be this might be your dream job. And so you were just glazing over it thinking this is dreamy, this is perfect, this is pie in the sky. But if you have a second set of eyeballs to look at that and someone you trust and you say, well, I thought your salary was going to be $88,000 and this says $81,000. Well, guess what? It could just be an honest mistake. So what you do at that point is you go back to them and you say, you know, over the phone we discussed $88,000. This offer letter says $81,000. I'm sure that's a mistake. What do we need to do to fix it? I'm going back to that language of we, okay? You're on a team. Negotiation is not a battle. It's a conversation. So go back into this discussion in terms of how can we do this? This is a long-term relationship. You're going to see this person 40 plus hours a week, so don't use any adversarial language. You want to use language that shows you're a team player and that you're committed. And a lot of times people think, well, if I negotiate, they're going to think I'm too bossy. But if you negotiate strategically, what they're going to think is you're a strong player. And if you negotiate for your behalf, you're also going to negotiate on the company's behalf, right? So keep that in mind, especially when you're deciding. So sometimes you have to make a hard decision and you have to walk away because it just isn't the best thing for you. And that's really tough, especially if in your current position you're feeling a little burnt out or frustrated or whatever the case may be that prompted you to start your job search in the first place. But what you don't want to do is leave one situation where you're unhappy and go into another work situation where you're unhappy. And you don't want to be resentful. You don't want to get into the position and say, oh, I knew I should have got more money. I knew I should have asked for this. So take that time. And if you have to walk away, the right offer will come because you have skills that you're going to bring to the table where you're adding value. Okay? So keep that in mind. So if you decide to accept it, when you accept, again, read everything thoroughly and sign and accept. A couple of things that people negotiate for outside of salary is start date, vacation days. What's becoming increasingly popular is student loan repayment, not just tuition reimbursement, actually helping students cover their previous loans. If you don't do your research and find out what's standard in the industry, whether it's parking or summer childcare for your family if you have that, then you're not going to know to ask for these things. So don't just sit in front of Google and type a couple of things in. Actually talk to people in your professional associations. And that's one of the reasons why I advocate for joining a professional association, because you'll have those relationships and people in the industry know what's standard. What's standard in one industry is not in the next. So if you're switching industries, what may have worked for you in your previous company may not work in your new company. You just have to do that legwork. So I want you to take action. I shared with you at the beginning that the reason why I teach negotiation is so that I can eliminate the gender wage gap, or at least help more women to advocate for themselves. So don't just take this information and leave it here. If you don't put it into action, nothing's going to change for you. And I'll leave you with this quote. Men have to demand that their wives, daughters, mothers, and sisters earn more, commensurate with their qualifications and not their gender. Equality will be achieved when men and women are granted equal pay and equal respect. So now I'll take questions.
What have you been kind of seeing in the marketplace in terms of, the macro data is consistently telling us that wages are stagnant. What are you kind of finding here locally in the Atlanta market, and if you can have any insight in between different kind of job verticals, whether it be retail or tech or whatever?
Yeah, so that's a common thing that wages are stagnant. But if you look industry by industry, everything's different, okay? Also company by company. So there's no blanket, this is it. And I think one of the problems that we have when we talk about wages is we put it in one bucket. And there are so many different factors that go into different things that you really want to make sure that you're looking specifically in your industry and looking at not only what your competitor or your employer is offering, but what your competitor companies are offering as well, to look at the wages, because your employer wants to retain the top talent, or your potential employer. So going across the board, you just want to look specifically at which industry you're in, because tech is paying more and it depends on the city. So right now I'm based in Dallas, Texas. I've been in Atlanta I was in Atlanta for 8 years. So I saw wages go up and down. But when I was working in IT staffing and recruiting, I will tell you that I saw a lot of offers that were lowball offers. Because at the end of the day, companies want to save money while they do want the best talent. So it's just going to be a matter of, for your specific industry and in your company, doing the research, because one department gets paid and that same company can be vastly different. So some people can be underpaid and some people can be overpaid. And that's one of the reasons why I also advocate for pay transparency. Because when you have that transparency, people aren't wondering. What tends to happen is when there isn't that transparency, people oftentimes assume they're underpaid when sometimes they could be overpaid or they could be paid right at market rate. So as much research and data as you can find, that's going to help you benchmark that. Yes.
So I guess it's kind of a legal question. When a potential employer asks you what your current salary is, do you have to answer? Can you not answer? And is that a bad or good practice?
All right.
I'm always curious about that.
So we kind of touched on that earlier. Some states, it is becoming illegal to require that question. Now, legally, you're not required to answer what your current salary is. And I've heard some employers will demand a previous W-2 or the last 6 pay stubs. And when you're facing that type of situation, you have to make a personal decision. If this is how they're operating at the beginning, is this something that you really want to get into? But in terms of, is it a legal requirement right now in Georgia for them, can they ask that question? Georgia, to my knowledge, as of today, it's still legal for them to ask you your previous salary. In a couple of states, they can't require, they can still ask, they're not required. So you're not gonna have that red asterisk on that screen when you go to apply. So even once we move forward and that's not a requirement, that box can still be there.
Does it reflect poorly on you if you don't answer?
No, it doesn't reflect poorly on you, but one of the things that you can do is you can pop in the market rate, okay? And that's what I advocate for. Be very clear about your expectations of what you want to earn for the work that you're going to perform. So go through and do all of your research and figure out what that market rate is, and it's totally appropriate for you to share with them the market rate. There's something in negotiation called anchoring, and that's where you actually set the stage. A lot of people say, don't throw the first number out because that's the first person to lose. Well, when we think about things like buying a house and a car, you're not letting the buyer set the rate for your house, right? You're anchoring. You're going to negotiate based on the market, what the market says it's valued at. And so your skills and the knowledge and your network that you bring to your position, that has value. And so it's just a matter of pricing that appropriately. Yes.
What industries would you say it's pretty typical to offer tuition reimbursement for?
So I've seen personally in Atlanta that the FBI does tuition reimbursement for accounting majors. And I've just been seeing that a lot. So they do tuition reimbursement, but they do student loan repayment too. And then federal government-wise, because I know the federal government is a large employer in Atlanta, there are those special programs, and they're put on special pay memos, so they're not going to be on your regular GS scale. So I gave a couple of examples of places to find that salary data if you're working in the public sector, but if you're working for government, if you go to opm.gov, all of the pay schedules are on there. But just be aware that there are special pay memos, and those special pay memos do allow for extra money in the budget if you have specialized skills, which is why it's really important to hone in on the value that you add and your unique value.
What are your thoughts on, say you've negotiated and a company just can't get to the number that you want to reach, and so what are your thoughts on asking for a cash bonus up front, and then if you think it's a good idea, how do you go about framing that question?
Yeah, so it depends on the industry. What's standard for the industry? In tech, that might be okay, and in some sales positions, they might give you a signing bonus. Education, like you're not going to get a signing bonus as a teacher, okay? So it's all industry based. Everything that I'm giving you, you want to make sure that it still fits within the framework of what's standard for your industry. But if you're asking for a sign-on bonus and you can't get to that salary range, one of the questions I ask is, okay, I understand that this money isn't available because sometimes it just isn't. So what can we do? Okay? And let them present some things to you. Another question that I ask is, have any exceptions ever been made? When you ask those questions, you want that awkward pause. Don't rush in and keep talking and trying to fill it in and try to justify. Give them a chance to answer, because they may tell you, well, we can't do the salary, but we can do this sign-on bonus, or we can do a performance-based bonus on the back end. So once you hit these metrics, then we can do this. Or if we sign this new client, then we can move to this salary. But everything's going to be case by case. Part of negotiation just isn't speaking, it's also listening and asking insightful questions. So think about those questions that can't be answered with a yes or no, right, when you're going into a negotiation, but also think big picture. Because, again, you're putting yourself in their shoes, too. You're not only thinking about what you want, you're thinking about the value you can add to them and what you're getting in exchange for that value. Yes.
If you could kind of, let's say money, using your earlier, that $88,000 is non-negotiable.
Okay.
That's the offer. What are kind of lists on the priorities, the things that you've seen that they are willing to give up? So is it going from 2 weeks or 3 weeks vacation to 3 to 4 weeks vacation? Is it an upfront bonus? What is the ask when money is not an option?
So going back to that preparation stage, in our framework, we have prepare and package, then we have practice, ask, and decide. So in that first framework, you have to decide what's most important to you. Okay? At different stages of life, you're going to have different things that are important. So maybe vacation is important, or tuition reimbursement, or even relocation. So I'll give you an example. I had a client that I was working with. She was moving from Atlanta to Chicago. And in her offer letter, they told her she would have a $20,000 relocation. But she had been living with her aunt in Atlanta. So she didn't have any furniture. All she had was her clothes and her car. So $20,000 was way too much. So what we did was we asked them if they could reallocate that money to a student loan repayment. It changed the terms of her employment, meaning they asked her to stay a little bit longer, which was standard. So industry by industry, it's going to be different, but it's also going to depend mostly on what's most important to you in terms of how you rank what you ask for. So if that 88 is fixed, then is it a title that's most important to you? Is it a career track that's most important to you? Do you want them to pay your professional association fees as well as you want to attend a conference and you want them to pay for it? All of that's going to matter for what you ask for, and then you're going to look at what they've typically given. Okay, so I've even seen some employers give spa memberships or golf club memberships. Depends on your scope of work. If they need you to be in the office because you have a client-facing position, then asking for a remote 4-day-a-week job, that really isn't going to work because you have to be customer-facing with your client. So what's most important to you, and then what's standard for the industry, and then what you're trying to do in that negotiation is come to the middle ground and figure out what's going to be a win-win for both of you. Does that make sense? Any other questions? Well, thank you all for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.